happy January, and you know what that means. It is time to talk about anticipated releases for January 2025. We have a fresh start of a reading year to grasp onto here and a lot of books right out the gate to be excited about. Now, as usual, these are just the books that are personally on my radar, so if there are any that I have missed that you are excited about, please feel free to share those in the comments as well so that we have even more to be excited about. If you are new, hi, my name is Melody, and we talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel. Today it's pretty self-explanatory where on the book spectrum we're falling, and I apologize in advance to your library holds, but just know that I have already maxed out my library holds with this list as well. Also, I think I have a cold, so my voice sounds very weird in my ears. I don't know what it's gonna sound like from the microphone, but maybe it'll be the incentive I need to not babble on quite as much. Now, I know I missed the last couple of months other than December of 2024 and the really big publishing months, to be completely honest. But even with January being historically not a huge publishing month, but again, we've seen a real shift in the landscape the last decade where it feels like it is just busy all the time now rather than being really concentrated in the fall, because I already have 25 titles in January that are on my radar. So that's saying something, especially considering I had thought I'd pared it down. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first New Book Tuesday of 2025, January 7th, which is also, I believe, one of the heavier New Book Tuesdays of the month. So we're starting out strong, and we are very concentrated in the beginning of the month here in terms of what's on my radar, so you don't get too concerned when it feels like I have been dwelling on two in particular release days for a long time and are sitting there like, there are still Tuesdays in this month. What the heck is she doing? That is what it is, but also probably still a valid question. So, A Traitorous Heart by Aaron Cotter is the first book on my radar for the year, just by happenstance, in that it happened to be the first book I wrote down for this day. This is a young adult historical fiction in 16th century France that involves a bisexual love triangle of some sort, and I apologize in advance for butchering the French names and pronunciations, but our heroine Jack is the lady-in-waiting and former lover of Princess Margot, or Marguerite, who is betrothed, or Jack is attempting to get her betrothed, to Henry for political reasons, until she also starts to fall for him amidst the machinations. And I love a good historical fiction that has some kind of romantic element as well, and this feels like a return to some of the YA I really loved coming up in terms of those historical settings, and I am very eager to see how it's presented and excited to see something of this nature in 2025. It has court, it has love affairs, it has spies. There are a surprising number of spies in the books I'm anticipating this month, but maybe not a surprising number in that it is me anticipating them. So very intrigued by this title for sure. Next we have The Capital of Dreams by Heather O'Neill. This is the author of When We Lost Our Heads, which I have not read yet, and The Lonely Hearts Hotel, which I read when it came out many years ago. But this is blurbed for fans of Kelly Link and seems to take place in a kind of fantastical dystopian liminal space, and I am so intrigued by this. It takes place in a fictional European country that is renowned for its artists and follows a protagonist whose mother is a renowned and celebrated writer, and she is entrusted with her mother's manuscript as things start to turn south and our protagonist has to flee the country to escape the war. But she ends up losing this manuscript and she goes on a journey to try and retrieve it, which I think is going to kind of blend that reality and fantasy in those elements and send us on this kind of quest that blurs those lines. It's listed as a dark fairy tale, which is very intriguing, and for me personally is more enticing than a dystopia. And I'm interested in how we are considering the dystopian elements based on the blurb. Is it just the kind of conflict and war that the narrative ends up mired in as our protagonist is fumbling her way through? But that is also, it feels like to me, figurative as much as literal, but I haven't read the book yet, but am very intrigued by the conceit of it. So very interested in that. And based on O'Neill's other work, both of what I've read and know, it feels like even within this fantastical setting, there will be some historical rooting in terms of like the language may be familiar for fans of historical fiction and it may root itself in some of those conventions, but we'll see. This also could be branching out from that type of storytelling as well. Next, as a highly anticipated addition to the romantasy genre, we have The Starlight Heir by Amelie Howard, which follows a bladesmith who is called to the capital to kind of test or gauge her as a potential bride for the crown prince, but instead she ends up compelled and drawn to the crown prince's illegitimate half-brother, even as it becomes clear that there is more to her being pulled to the capital than it first appears, especially as there is growing conflict and a search or hunt for the Star Keeper, which is a girl who has the magic of the stars in her blood. And amidst this, our protagonist finds an ally in this half-brother of the prince, and potentially, probably, a romantic interest as well, but we'll see how much of a triangle is presented in this one. But this is getting a lot of buzz on the romantasy front, and I am very hopeful about this one for sure. Next, we have a young adult novel, Royal Heirs Academy by Lindsay Dugga, which seems to combine the kind of popular subgenres of royal fiction and YA and the current kind of popularity of these competitions that pit characters against each other and test their loyalties and present opportunities for alliances and backstabbing and all of that. I will admit that I haven't read a whole lot in this subgenre. I've obviously seen the titles, but I haven't read a whole lot of them. So I am very intrigued because historically I have enjoyed the kind of royalty subgenre of YA back to my Princess Diaries days. So I'm interested to see when these like two popular subgenres are combined, and I think it could be a really winning combination, especially when there is something as high stakes as the throne on the line. Next, we have the first nonfiction on my radar for the month, and that is The Waiting Game: The Untold Story of the Women Who Served the Tudor Queens by Nicola Clark. I anticipate probably getting this on Libro.fm. There are a number of nonfiction this month that I want to use some Libro.fm credits on, so it's a good thing that I have some ported up. I did recently restart my Libro.fm membership that I had paused when I was laid off like a year or two ago, and I just had a backlog of credits that I wasn't using every month, but cashing in occasionally, and I recently restarted it when they introduced the every other month plan, and I of course reserve the right to bump that back up to the monthly plan at any time, but that's just currently the plan I'm on. So I think have a credit coming this month so that I don't have to completely decimate my remaining hoard. But as it says, this is a nonfiction history exploring the lives of the ladies in waiting to infamous Tudor queens, and I'm very interested to explore this. I'm very interested to know if any of the ladies in waiting featured here are going to be characters I'm familiar with. There is a chance, but also a good likelihood that I'm not. But I am interested in exploring this kind of well-trod familiar history. Not completely well-trod, like I don't know everything by any means, but I'm interested in exploring something that I know reasonably well from an alternate point of view, and considering these women from the points of view of the women who served them, I think is going to be incredibly interesting. And also considering the realities for the ladies in waiting and how these political machinations impacted their day-to-day and just what their day-to-day even looked like. So very interested in how this is going to be framed, what exactly it is. Intrigued for sure. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I do think being sick is helping me be more succinct. That being said, next is one of my most anticipated books, honestly, of the year. Side note, I had a whole video planned for December of anticipated 2025 book releases that I just didn't get to, but we will get to as they come out. And the first is Immortal by Sue Lynn Tan, which is her new standalone fantasy. And if you remember Daughter of the Moon Goddess, despite the fact that I still need to read the sequel and companion novella was one of my favorite books the year it came out. I absolutely loved the fairy tale-esque nature of it combined with the romantic elements, and it feels like this one is going to be in a similar vein, so I am very excited. It follows an heir to the throne who angers the gods after her grandfather steals a flower in order to save her life after she has been poisoned. More specifically, she angers the god of war. And when she ascends the throne, she's not in the best political position. And then she is summoned to the immortal realm where she hopes to end the reliance on the immortals in the wake of some of the bargains that have been made, which puts her in the direct path of the god of war to whom she is drawn, and he may be drawn right back. So very, very excited for the potential of this one, and am very, very hopeful that it is going to hit the similar kind of feelings for me that Daughter of the Moon Goddess did. So very much looking forward to this book. Next, another nonfiction I will likely do in audio in my favorite vein of true crime, the very, very historical kind. We have The Sinners All Bow, 2 authors, 1 murder, and the real Hester Prynne. And this is by Kate Winkler Dawson, and it is exploring the real case that inspired what is largely considered to be the first American true crime narrative, Fall River, which subsequently inspired The Scarlet Letter from Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, The Scarlet Letter is infamously popular required reading in high school that I was never required to read. Actually, if I'm thinking of like some of the big hitters that I was never required to read, it all comes back, I think, to us not actually reading a full novel in 11th grade AP American Lit, which is what happened, but I tried to read The Scarlet Letter on my own because I did go back and try and go to a lot of the classics that I missed, and I have gone through big classic phases in my reading past, and I still try and slip in or revisit where I can. But I always, well, one, I was trying to read, do you remember like the really small pocket Barnes & Noble classics, not the mass market paperbacks, but the ones with like the gilded edges and the little ribbon, and they were very small little hardcovers? That's what I had, and I was always getting tripped up in the Custom House essay at the beginning of the book because I just refused to believe that I could jump into The Scarlet Letter without having read that essay, and my teenage brain just was not concentrating on that essay. So, needless to say, I have not actually read The Scarlet Letter. I keep meaning to circle back. Maybe this would be a good incentive to actually circle back, but I'm very excited for the kind of exploration of this case from like a cultural critique standpoint with the distance of time and history, since it does involve an affair and a Methodist minister who was never charged for any crime, but there is a lot of critique and kind of exploration wrapped up in that I know is part of The Scarlet Letter, even without having read it. But then also being able, presumably based on this book and the fact that it does center these 2 other works, exploring how each is in conversation and how each reflects kind of the sentiments of the time, or what each is engaging with in its own version of what happened. So very interested for both the kind of true crime element of it, but more importantly, I think the kind of cultural critique that is going to come out of it, which I think is part of the reason that within true crime, I really, really prefer the historical, especially because then you don't have current victims that can be impacted by those explorations or kind of retreading. Though, speaking of victims, the next and last book for the 7th we have is The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom by Sherry Frankie. Now, the entire internet was really rocked by the Frankie case at the end of 2023 through 2024, and I have never been a fan of family vlogs, so I was really unaware of this channel prior to what went down. I had seen some critiques of the channel through other commentary channels that also do not like family vlogging and feel it is exploitative, but because of that, I have never interacted with any of the children of this family. And this is probably the first of a lot of high-profile family vlogger children coming out to tell their story, and the horrors of this particular case are extraordinary. But I have listened to Frankie talk about the realities and then just kind of more normal horrors, as horrific as that in and of itself is to say, of the daily realities of being in a family vlogging family and being a child and coming up in that environment. And I think it is incredibly important that these narratives and these stories start coming out and being told as these individuals are comfortable, because to be completely fair, they have had all autonomy really stripped from them throughout their life, and no one is required to share their story. And so while this is not going to be an easy narrative and likely isn't something I would naturally gravitate to because of that, I really do think it's important to support Sherry Frankie, and also important to hear her out and validate her experience in that way. Additionally, as I'm sure there will be a lot of coverage of this book after it comes out, because there has been a lot of coverage and cycle of commentary around this entire case, I do think it is incredibly important to be either buying this book or borrowing it from the library if you are interested, so that Frankie is directly supported in the telling of her story and is compensated accordingly, because let's be completely honest, people have been monetizing her story for her entire life. So yeah, just consider, if you're going to consider watching the coverage of other people talking about the book, I would highly encourage you to potentially pick up the book yourself if you are interested. Did that maybe just ruin me patting myself on the back for keeping things more succinct today? Probably. With that, let's move on to January 14th, and the first book I have on my radar is billed as a young adult gothic horror thriller, so right up my alley, and that is Honeysuckle and Bone by Trisha Tobias. This follows a teen on the run from her past, and she sees her future on a grand Jamaican estate, granting her access to her mother's homeland and the opportunity she thinks it provides, as well as a potential new flirtation. But things at the house aren't all that they appear, and it may be the house or it may be her past catching up with her, but something isn't quite right, and new beginnings may not be quite as easy as she thinks. Next we have Good Girl by Aria Aber, which is a debut following the daughter of Afghan refugees as she kind of finds herself mired in the artistic underground and nightlife of Berlin, and just kind of chronicles her year of self-discovery in this underworld of sorts. And it seemingly kind of contrasts the self-discovery and time in this artistic underground against the realities of growing racial tensions. It's setting itself up to be a really intriguing kind of coming of age story, kind of contrasting the artistic ideals in underground with more stark kind of realities. The end of the blurb says, "A story of love and family, raves and Kafka, staying up all night and surviving the mistakes of youth. Good Girl is the virtuosic debut by a celebrated young poet and now a major new voice in fiction." So very intrigued for this one, and think it could be up the alley of fans of the Year of Rest and Relaxation, but we will see. Next we have Everything is Poison by Joe McCullough, who is also the author of Bloodwater Paint, and though I do need to finish it, Enter the Body. And in the vein of Bloodwater Paint, which I absolutely loved, Everything is Poison seems to be a feminist, young adult, historical narrative. And here specifically, we are at La Tofana Apothecary, which probably sounds familiar for Aqua Tofana, which I'm probably butchering, the infamous poison. So I am very intrigued by this one, the kind of darkness and power and rage that McCullough is able to funnel, as we saw in Bloodwater Paint. And you know what, darkness isn't right, but I'm very interested in how this is going to be framed. But she empowers these historical figures to step into their power and does it through poetry, which is very intriguing. You know, when I was coming up in young adult, we saw a lot of books written in poetry. It was very popular for narratives such as Crank and that kind of school of contemporary fiction at the time. So it's really fun to see that utilized here as well, especially because I do think that poetic novels or novels in poetry are very accessible for a lot of readers. So very excited for this one. And I also do need to swing back and actually finish Enter the Body, because that's following a lot of the women of Shakespearean tragedies, which is a super fun conceit and starts with a liminal space, but my library loan just became due in the middle of it. So I will have to circle back. Next, we have a new nonfiction title from Matthew Pearl, best known for his historical fiction, or for me personally, best known for me constantly checking out the Dante Club from the library in high school without ever actually reading it, and filling me with an immense sense of shame as I would walk by the section while reshelving. But for the purpose of right now, we are talking about Save Our Souls, the true story of a castaway family, treachery, and murder, which, if you are keeping score at home, is indeed another boat book, or at least a boat tragedy book, which I feel like is close enough for my book club. Now, for some reason, I'm not seeing it in the Goodreads kind of synopsis. For some reason, maybe I read it on the Edelweiss synopsis. I had it in my head that this was a story that inspired Swiss Family Robinson. And while I have not watched Swiss Family Robinson or read Swiss Family Robinson in a long time, I've never read the book. I'm not going to lie to you. I watched the movie a lot as a kid though, and I loved the treehouse. I thought it was so much fun. And while I recognize the reality doesn't involve a treehouse, I was very interested in what the precursor for it was. And so I had it in my head that this was that. I don't think it is. Still a castaway story, but the word murder is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and when this family is stranded on this island, there is already someone on the island who I believe may have a storied history. I feel like maybe I've heard this story in some iteration on a podcast before, but I cannot be sure. Either way, I think it will make a very interesting listen. It doesn't look like it's too long, and it's something to keep in my back pocket for when we need a boat book for book club, inevitably after it comes out in paperback, because I feel like David Grant we can get away with reading in hardcover, but there are only so many authors we're going to do that for, so I can test drive it via audiobook and my Libro.fm credits and report back. Next, we have another young adult historical with a kind of espionage bend in The Queen's Spade by Sarah Raleigh. This is following the same historical figure as a release from last year. I still need to read The Other Princess, in Sarah Bonetta Forbes, who was once a princess of the Igboto clan, was stolen, kidnapped, and became a goddaughter to Queen Victoria. And in this iteration, she is seeking revenge on those who have wronged her, including the Queen. So we have the historical elements, those espionage stakes, and it looks like potentially a little bit of romance sprinkled in as well, so I am in. Next, we have Death in the Downline by Maria Abrams. If you know me, you know I am fascinated by the world of MLMs and actually have historically consumed an embarrassing amount of anti-MLM content on YouTube. It's just a fascinating combination of cult and scam, and this is a murder mystery taking place within an MLM structure, and I am so in on that concept. I'm unclear if this is a cozy mystery or not. It feels like it should be, but I am intrigued, especially because it seems to be focused on like a wellness MLM, which has the potential, depending on the focus of the book, to also play in to the kind of wellness culture narratives that I've been really interested in within the last however many years. So we'll see, but if nothing else, it feels like it would be a campy good time, and who doesn't want a little more campy good time? I mean, come on. Next is Watermoon by Samantha Soto Yambao, which I feel like has been getting a lot of buzz already and is a kind of fantastical, kind of fairy tale-esque in the sense that it is described as dreamlike tale of a pawn shop in Tokyo where you can pawn your deepest regrets. But on the morning that she's set to take over this pawn shop, our protagonist finds it ransacked and is offered help by a mysterious stranger, which sets them on a kind of mythical quest involving, as the blurb says, a night market in the clouds. So I am very excited for the potential for kind of wonder and the fantastical in this book. So yeah, we'll see. I definitely have a library hold on that one already. Speaking of very hyped books and kind of coming out of nowhere, very hyped in the sense that I've just really seen the hype ramp up, which makes sense because it's getting published this month. The Favorites by Lane Fargo, which when it first came across my radar was really writing on its comparisons to Wuthering Heights, and feels like it has kind of transcended some of that in the way people are describing it recently, but it is this exploration of a pair of ice dancers and the kind of tortured history between them, which is very Wuthering Heights from what I've read on the blurb, which may be making you make a confused face because I do not historically enjoy Wuthering Heights. Now, granted, I haven't read it for many, many years, but Emily is decidedly my least favorite Bronte, and I just didn't appreciate Wuthering Heights when I read it. I did not like the characters. That's just it. So I'm very interested in if this can live up to the hype for me. I'm not saying this in a sense of I'm going in to something I do not expect to like, because I like the world of kind of figure skating and ice dancing as a setting. So I'm just very intrigued by this, especially because it is kind of writing the line seemingly between like sports romance and literary fiction and what those kind of bounds are, what that means for the ending. And I also honestly am intrigued by the hype. I want to know what people are excited about. I hope that I will also be excited by it. So I am very hopeful. I already have a hold on it. We will see. Next, we have a book of poetry, Helen of Troy, 1993 Poems by Maria Zoccola. This I'm intrigued by because it is a reimagining of Helen of Troy in 1990s Tennessee and just what that world looks like. So I'm very interested in what the parallels are going to be. The fact that it is a conceptual poetry collection, I'm always very intrigued by. So very interested in this and just kind of the images it already conjures for me as someone that grew up in the 90s. So interested to see if it's going to evoke similar tones to what I am imagining. All right, moving on to January 21st, we are starting with a re-release, a historical romance re-release at that, and not just any historical romance re-release, but one of the giants of historical romance that I will admit I have not read nearly enough of, and that is A Knight in Shining Armor by Jude Deveraux. Now, I actually just snapped this book up a couple of weeks ago on sale on Kobo with obviously an older cover, though not the original cover, to which I am not devastated by any means. Listen, there has been a lot of discourse about historical romance covers. I didn't really touch on it too much in my kind of State of the Union of historical romance video, and I know after that we've cycled through a lot of discourse online. And as a historical romance reader, I do have an emotional attachment to certain things on covers. I mean, I'm not saying we didn't talk about it at all. We did. But I also am trying really, really hard to recognize that we are aiming to bring in new readers to the genre, and with that we have to try new things on covers. And additionally, covers have been repackaged over and over to the point where I saw this release, and I do think that there's another Jude Deveraux package or repackage coming out this month potentially as well. But I was like, oh, this is why in the 2000s all of the books had For the First Time in Print on them, even though after like the initial release of that book, the First Time in Print label doesn't do much in terms of an indicator. However, I'm understanding it now. I've been through the life cycle long enough to understand that that was because books were being repackaged in that time as well. And so this is a repackaging of one of the giants of the genre. If you listen to Fated Mates, especially for a certain subset and generation of historical romance readers, Jude Deveraux, Joanna Lindsey, and Julie Garwood are really the entry points to historical romance. Now, I only had one of those three that were really my bread and butter as a young romance reader in Julie Garwood, and I've done a whole video revisiting a couple of her titles. But this does have something that I loved even at this time as a romance reader, and this time being when I was a new romance reader, in a way that I am shocked I have not read this book. And that is time travel combined with medieval romance here, because I loved especially Lynn Kurland and Karen Marie Moning, who was on a different kind of level in terms of heat than Lynn Kurland, at least to my recollection. But this feels much more in line with Lynn Kurland and those rascally matchmaking ghosts. I don't think there are any rascally matchmaking ghosts in this one before I get accused of false advertising, but I love a time travel romance, so I'm very excited. I'm also very interested because it has or will have a contemporary heroine that is a contemporary heroine of her time when this was written. And having revisited within the last year or two, even one of Karen Marie Moning's contemporary heroines of the early 2000s, it's interesting to kind of re-enter that mindset in a lot of ways. And so I'm very interested to see how I respond to this in wake of that. I am very excited that we are reintroducing some more kind of medieval historicals into the mix, as I hope we continue to kind of push the bounds as we've gotten kind of in a Regency rut over the last decade or so. And I love Regency historical romance, but I would also like to see us continue to push the bounds of time and place in regards to our historical romance. And I'm not pretending that medieval historical romance is cutting edge, but it's at least reintroducing something different to the market. So very excited to see how this is received, even if the cover doesn't necessarily invoke what would draw me in. I also find it just fascinating that they would have put this on sale on Kobo weeks before re-releasing it in trade. And that says to me that those are different audiences that we are targeting there. So I don't know, that's just something for me to ponder, I guess, and I have no like observations or conclusions to draw from that at this time, but we'll just put a pin in it in case I have thoughts later. Next we have another historical romance, My Inconvenient Duke by Loretta Chase. This is the third in the Difficult Duke series. I have not yet read this series. I was peeking through some reviews that implied that you might want to read the whole series to fully appreciate this one, which is interesting because you usually can kind of bop around as you see fit. I do need to read more deeply in Loretta Chase. And this is a kind of shameful point as a historical romance reader, I just downloaded Lord of Scoundrels, which also went on sale within the last month. I've been snapping up a lot of historical romances, both new and familiar, in recent Kobo sales, which has been great. But I do have a lot I still need to read. This follows Alice, who needs to find a husband because her brother is being incredibly reckless and she fears him getting himself killed and the estate turning over to a distant cousin that will not take care of her. And so she needs to secure her future, and this puts her in contact or in the line of the Duke of Blackwood, with which she has a history, and things become much more complicated as it seems like there's some kind of past event that is kind of festering. I'm sure if I'd read the rest of the series, that would probably be a little bit more evident to me, but coming in with just the blurb, that's what I have. I am always interested because this is kind of adjacent in conceit, it seems, to a Marriage of Convenience kind of setup. So I am definitely intrigued by that concept to start us off, and we will definitely see. Next, we have The Rainfall Market by Yo Young Zhuang, translated by Slen Jung, and this follows another kind of mystical, magical place, this time being a place where you can trade in your old life after you receive an invitation to the Rainfall Market, which is what happens to our protagonist as she enters the Rainfall Market and attempts or tries on different lives with the companion of a magical cat. But the catch is she has to make a decision before a week is out, and she is trapped in the market forever as she is having trouble deciding what her best life would be. Next, we have another historical romance, Earl Crush by Alexandra Vasti. This involves an heiress who has been penning seditious pamphlets and also has been involved in a long-term pen pal kind of situation with an earl who has similar kind of political leanings, except When she goes to meet this Earl, she learns she has actually been corresponding with his missing brother, and the real Earl isn't exactly happy and ends up enlisting our heiress's help as he is bound and determined to track down his brother, who has become enmeshed in espionage. And in wake of this, they are pushed together and attractions build. So another instance of espionage, and not our final instance of espionage. Finally, for the 21st, we have the first new English translated novel from Han Kang since she won the 2024 Nobel for Literature, and this feels like it is going to be very atmospheric and lyrical and exist in a kind of dreamscape. Honestly, like the books I have personally already read from her, The Vegetarian and Human Acts really do. I do need to swing back and pick up Greek lessons as well, but this is following a protagonist who gets trapped in a snowstorm when going to take care of a friend's bird after their friend is in the hospital. And I just want to read the final bit of the blurb here that I think kind of sets our expectations for what we're walking into in a really delightful way. It says, blurring the boundaries between dream and reality, We Do Not Part powerfully illuminates a forgotten chapter in Korean history, buried for decades, bringing to light the lost voices of the past to save them from oblivion. Both a hymn to an enduring friendship and an argument for remembering, it is the story of profound love in the face of unspeakable violence and a celebration of life, however fragile it might be. And so with that, this leads me to believe it will be more in line with Human Acts than The Vegetarian, and Human Acts absolutely wrecked me, so I am very much looking forward to what we're going to get here and hopeful that she will continue to see the Nobel bump for this release as well. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and finish it up with the new releases of January 28th, for which we have 3. So we are almost to the finish line here. The first is another historical romance involving espionage, The Wayward Duke by Katrina Kendrick. This involves a seemingly second chance romance involving a couple that has been separated, and the Duke kind of isolates himself amidst his code breaking after his wife Caroline is able to kind of get under his icy exterior. And in the wake of this abandonment, Caroline has still been the kind of perfect society duchess until the Duke comes back in a way that sweeps her up in his mission. This is a new to me historical romance author, so I am very hopeful about this one. Okay, next we have another romantasy, Gate to Kagoshima by Poppy Kuroki, which is being billed as the Hurricane Wars meets the Time Traveler's Wife slash Outlander, which to me just says that they don't have a whole lot of time travel romance recs, because this definitely feels more Outlander than the Time Traveler's Wife, in that our Scottish protagonist is in Japan researching her family history when a typhoon sends her back 128 years to the time of the Satsuma Rebellion. So lots of parallels in terms of being on the eve of a conflict in the time travel romance there. And in the wake of this, she does meet an ancestor as well as a charismatic samurai Kai, but she knows the outcome of this rebellion as she is trapped in the past. So, as I'm sure you would agree, a lot more parallels to the comp for Outlander than the Time Traveler's Wife, but since I haven't read it yet, maybe I will be proven wrong. However, those are things I am very interested in, so very much intrigued by this, and I think I have a hold on this one already, because as I've said before, I love time travel, especially time travel romance. It is interesting because it does look like this is being kind of billed and published as romantasy, and so it's leaning into that angle for the time travel angle, it seems, unless there could be other romantasy elements or fantastical elements. But I have always historically seen time travel aligned more with the historical element of historical romance. So I guess we'll see. But also we haven't historically had a really robust kind of romantasy category, so that probably plays into things. However, I do wonder, in terms of the setting of expectations for readers, how that will go. But I guess we'll see, but definitely excited about this in terms of more diversity of time and place in historical romance. Lots of opportunities here. Okay, last anticipated release of January, which is good for my voice, but Old Soul by Susan Barker. I'm going to read just like the tagline here because I'm trying to figure out how to synthesize what I'm getting from the blurb here. But it says, the woman never goes by the same name. She never stays in the same place too long. She never ages. She never dies, but those around her do. So two individuals, two grieving strangers, meet outside of an Osaka airport, and they discover that the deaths of their best friend and brother, respectively, are connected by the presence of a mysterious woman, despite these losses being separated by thousands of miles and maybe time, though time isn't directly referenced to my reading of the blurb. And this spurs one of these strangers, Jake, on a hunt to discover who this woman is. Now, this is the kind of thriller suspense really appealing to me right now, one with like a literary or horror bend as well, because I don't want to preemptively, definitively state vampires, but it's something that feels like vampires, and that is good enough for me. So, very interested and intrigued by this, which wraps up a very interesting and intriguing January. So yeah, there is honestly actually a lot more I am excited about this month than I anticipated, especially as I still have a lot of 2024 releases and before 2024 releases that I was anticipating that I need to get to. So we will see where the reading life leads this year, but there are a lot of options coming out this month, and I am sure we will be talking about some of these in Feature Fridays. So if you have some that are standing out to you right now that you would love to hear reviewed or dug into in a Feature Friday, please let me know below. Again, if there are books we didn't discuss today that you are excited about, please let me know below, or if there are books already on this list that you are still excited about and just want to shout about a little more, leave that below as well. But thank you for being interested in what I am excited about. Thank you for putting up with whatever my voice sounds like, because it sure feels weird. But like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good, and yeah, bye.